Morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rabbi.
Shavua Tova, Gatavach. We are learning Mishnah Beitza, Perek Beis, Chapter 2, Mishnah Aleph, Mishnah 1. Yom Tov Shachal L'Yois Erev Shabbos. If Yontif falls out on Erev Shabbos, meaning you have Yontif is Friday, and the next day is Shabbos. Lo Yavashal. Now again, let's remember we're talking about when there's one day of Yontif, which was, the original form, and in Eretz Yisrael it's still that way. One day of Yontif, so Yontif fell out on Friday, and you have then the next day is Shabbos. I mean, we have that also, right? We're going to have that this year when the second day of Pesach is Friday, and then leads into Shabbos Chol Hamoed. Mm-hmm. So, but the point is, you have a Yontif that falls out on Friday. The next day is Shabbos, and it doesn't make a difference if the next day is Shabbos and Yontif or just Shabbos. The point of our discussion is the next day is Shabbos. Lo yavashel adam betchila miyomtiv l'Shabbos. One may not cook on Yontif for Shabbos. Aval mavashel hu liyomtiv, but he can cook for Yontif. V'm haiser l'Shabbos. If he has any extra left over, he can eat that leftover for Shabbos. Now I'm just going to keep reading, and we'll go back and explain everything. But let's just get what it says first. V'oisa tav shomer of Yontif. But you could make a cooked food from before Yontif for Shabbos, and then rely on that to be able to cook on Yontif for Shabbos. So again, let's first get the statement. Let's get the halacha of the Mishnah. The halacha of the Mishnah is that you may not cook from Yontif to Shabbos. You're not allowed to do that. Now, if you cook for Yontif, and the Mishnah says, and you have leftover from Shabbos, so we don't say, you can't go from Yontif to Shabbos. If it's left over from Yontif, you can eat it on Shabbos. If you go ahead and you start preparing for Shabbos from before Yontif, then you can continue cooking on Yontif for Shabbos. Okay? Now, let's go step by step. But that's the halacha. Okay? Now, it starts off like this. And I'm reading to you from the notes. It's a little bit complicated, so pay attention. In reality, the Torah permits cooking on Yontif only what is needed for that day. It is forbidden to cook on Yontif for the next day. Essentially, you cannot cook from one day of Yontif for the next. Or meaning for the next day, whether it's Shabbos, whether it's Yontif. I'm sorry, whether it's Shabbos, whether it's not Shabbos, if it's a weekday. Okay. However, it is biblically permitted to cook extra food on Yontif if it might possibly be used later that day. For example, for unexpected guests who arrive late in the day. The sage may use of this principle known as Hayel, meaning since guests may show up, to permit cooking food for Shabbos when Yom Tov falls on Friday. Okay, there is a principle. The principle is like this. If you're cooking on Yom Tov, right? And we're only supposed to cook for that day of Yontif, not supposed to cook for that day of Yontif for a different day. But maybe guests are going to show up on Yontif. Maybe I'm going to have guests showing up, and I'm going to want to feed them. Oh, well, being that there's that possibility, then we say you could cook extra on Yontif. You could cook extra on Yontif. Why? Because I'm not cooking for the next day. I'm cooking for today in case guests show up. So do I need it right now? I don't need it. But in case guests show up and I want to feed them, I'm allowed to cook more. That's a Torah principle that says you can cook even what you're not necessarily planning on eating on Yontif because of the fact that you may have guests showing up. Now, that principle can only work. That principle can only make sense if there is enough time left in the day of Yontif for the food to cook and to be eaten that day, right? It only makes sense to do that if there's enough time to cook the food and to be able to eat it that day. Like 5 minutes before Yontif is over, that's exaggeration, but 5 minutes before Yontif is over, no, you can't go cooking and say, wow, guests may show up. Not enough time for that. You have to do it with enough time to cook it and to eat, and for it to be able to cook it, for the guests to eat it before Yontif ends. If you don't have enough time for that, then you may not, according to Torah law, cook from Yontif for more than what you need. Okay? Now, at the same time, this principle of Hoyel, meaning this principle of, well, I could cook more because of the fact that maybe guests will show up, is not something that we use on a regular day of Yontif. If it's meaning a regular day of Yontif, the next day is only regular main Yontif, and the next day is not Yontif. You want to go in and say, well, I'll cook more because maybe guests are going to show up. Midrabanan rabbinic law, we don't apply that principle unless the next day is Shabbos. Unless the next day is Shabbos. If the next day would be Shabbos, then already there's a possibility to go ahead. There would have been a possibility. There'll be a possibility to go ahead and use that principle. Now that's not so simple because, first of all, we're going to say that that's not happening yet because the Mishnah says you can't cook from Yontif to Shabbos, even on that day. I mean, according to Torah law, I would have been able to have gone ahead and I would have been able to have cooked extra on Yontif, knowing that I'll have it for Shabbos, right? Because of the fact that according to Torah law, I could have really done it anytime on Yontif. But the Rabbanan say no, they don't allow you to do that so quickly. But there will be a point of time where we will use that principle. So the Mishnah began and said like this. The Mishnah said, if Yontif falls out on Erev Shabbos, the day before Shabbos, you cannot cook. You cannot cook from that day. Cannot cook from Yontif to Shabbos. What about the klal? What about that principle we just said of Hayol? The principle of, well, maybe guests are going to show up. Why can't I cook extra? And I'll use that and I'll use that for Shabbos. Well, it would seem from the Mishnah that initially the sages said, we're not going to let you do that. As a rabbinic precaution, we're not going to let you do that. And therefore the Mishnah says that if you have Friday, you have Friday is Yontif and leading into Shabbos, then we say, Vavashul Yontif from Heiser. He may cook only what he actually needs for Yontif, and if he left over any Yontif food, he may use what he left over for Shabbos. Okay, that doesn't sound like we're applying the principle of Hayel. We're saying that, you got extra. That's what it sounds like. Now, at the same time, the Mishnah then said, but if I start cooking from before Yontif for Shabbos, I'll be okay. Now, what is the issue as to why the Chachamim said, we're not going to let you cook from Yontif to Shabbos? Even though there's a principle of Hayel, a principle that says maybe you'll have guests, so go ahead and cook more. We don't allow you to do that. Why? Because at the end of the day, if we were to go in and allow you to cook from Yontif to Shabbos, you know what you may do? You cook from Yontif to the week for a weekday. And we don't want you to do that. We didn't want you to do that. We didn't want you to go ahead and cook from Yontif to the weekday, and therefore, even for Shabbos, we're not going to let you do it. However, the Mishnah said, but if let's say I start cooking from before, right? I start cooking from before Yontif for Shabbos, then the Chachamim said, you know what you can do? You started before Shabbos, you can now finish on Yontif for Shabbos. Once you do that, the sages weren't afraid that you're going to think you can cook for Shabbos from Shabbos to weekday, because we're only even allowing you for Shabbos to finish up what you started. You can't just initially cook from Yontif to Shabbos. So therefore, once that's already in place, that's enough to be able for people to realize I cannot cook from Yontif to weekday. So once I go ahead and I start cooking from before Shabbos, then already the Chachamim said I could go ahead and cook from. I started before Shabbos for cooking for. Started before Yontif cooking for Shabbos, and now I can continue cooking from Yontif. I can finish my cooking from Yontif to Shabbos, and I believe there the Chachamim said, okay, there we're going to rely on the concept of Hayel. Now we can go in and apply the concept of Hayel. Once we don't have this concern, we have the concept that says, well, if guests will show up. According to Torah law, you can say, if guests are going to show up, I can go ahead and I can cook extra on Yontif. We use that when we go ahead, we use that idea from Yontif to Shabbos if you started cooking for Shabbos before Yontif. So again, kind of complicated, it's a little complicated, but the idea is that we didn't want you cooking from Yontif to Shabbos because we're afraid people might think you can cook from Yontif to weekday, which is not something we want you to do. And therefore, even though there is the concept of Hayel, that the Torah says, if you may have guests, you can cook more on Yontif than what you need, we don't apply that. However, If you started cooking from before Yontif for Shabbos, which means I'm only going to be concluding my cooking for Shabbos on Yontif, then we will rely on that idea using that concept of Hayol that says that since that you could cook extra on Yontif in case you have guests, here where I don't have much of a concern that people will think I can cook from Yontif to weekday, because I'm only because even for Shabbos, I'm only starting, I can only complete. I have to start from before I have to start from before Yontif already to cook for Shabbos. Then already we say it's permissible to do. There's a word for this. There's a term for cooking. So starting your cooking before Yontif for Shabbos. It's what we call Erev Tavshilin. That's what that's what it's called. And that's what we have to do this year before Pesach starts. Since we have a 3-day Yontif, as we call it, we're going from Yontif into Shabbos. We have to make Erev Tavshilin this year. We have to prepare food from before Yontif for Shabbos. We'll see soon what the halachas, what that involves. And you set that aside before Yontif for Shabbos. That's called, I started my Shabbos preparations before Yontif. And then on the second day of Yontif, I can cook for Shabbos. Okay, I can even do other things in preparation for Shabbos. Now, Beis Shammai say, Shnei Tavshilin. If you want to be considered that you started cooking for Shabbos, once you start cooking before Yontif, you have to cook 2 foods. You need 2 cooked foods. Shnei Tavshilin means I need 2 cooked dishes. Beis Shammai say, on Shabbos, people usually eat 2 cooked foods, 2 cooked dishes. So if you make 2 cooked dishes before Yontif for Shabbos, that's called I started my Shabbos preparation. If I do less than that, that's not Shabbos preparation. Nobody eats that. That's not what's typically eaten on Shabbos. I have to, if I'm making a Shabbos preparation, I have to make a preparation. Preparation means I've already started cooking for Shabbos. Well, cooking for Shabbos has to mean an amount of food that people would eat on Shabbos. Beis Shammai say that's 2 cooked foods. Beis Hillel say tap shel echad. No, 1 food's enough. Maybe true that usually there's 2 foods, but sometimes it's one of those Shabbos and it's only 1 food. It's only 1 cooked dish, and therefore, being that there are times on Shabbos when you'll only eat 1 cooked dish, that's enough for your Erev Tavshilin to make 1 cooked dish. Okay, the shavin, everybody agrees. The dag ubeitza sha'alav. Then when you make fish with egg on top of it, there used to be some kind of a food where they smeared an egg on top of a fish and they cooked it together. Okay, maybe it was, I don't know if it was sunny side or scrambled or what, but at the, but at the end of the day, this was the food that used to go in and smear the egg on top of the fish. Shehein shnei tavshilin. Even Beis Shammai say that counts as 2. Even though it's cooked as 1 thing, that counts as 2. For Erev Tavshilin, that counts as 2. Now here's the horror story. He ate it or got lost. Meaning he prepared the food before Yontif and somebody was hungry and saw it there and ate it. Uh-oh. No more to Erev Tavshilin, right? That's what happened. It was eaten before you started. Back up. It was eaten or lost before one started cooking on Yontif for Shabbos. Meaning, let's say somebody on Yontif ate it before you started cooking. That's the case of the Mishnah. It was eaten or it was lost. It was lost. Some rodent came and carried it off. Okay, some animal came and carried it off. At the end of the day, it comes out that you don't. By the time before you started cooking for Shabbos, it's gone. Says the Mishnah, you can't go cooking anymore on Yontif for Shabbos because now that food is gone, I'm starting anew. Right? I'm not supposed to cook from Yontif to Shabbos. It has to start before Yontif. Well, if that food before Yontif is gone, that means practically speaking, I'm starting anew. I'm starting from scratch on Yontif for Shabbos. That you can't do. Okay? So therefore now, if it happens to be that, let's say you started cooking something from Yontif to Shabbos, and then your Erev Tavshilin went missing, but you already started cooking a food, already started cooking something, they bring down here. However, if he started a dish when the Erev was still present, he may finish what he had begun. So if I can't cook new if the Erev Tavshilin is gone. But if I started cooking something when the Erev Tavshilin was still present, and then it got lost before I finished, then I can finish. Okay? Then the Mishnah says, "V'mishari b'menu kol shehu soymech alav l'Shabbos." If let's say something of it remains, that's enough to rely on it to be able to cook from Yom Tov to Shabbos. As long as a kazayas, as long as the volume of an olive, a large olive, let's call it, very large olive. Okay, it's more like our present size. It's more like the size of an egg, or call it a shot, an old time shot glass, not the 3 fluid ounce ones. The ones that are a little bit, where the ones that are like around a fluid ounce or more. That because that's the volume of a kazayas. If that much of food is left, you're still good. So there it is. You came by, you looked, and somebody started eating this Erev Tavshilin of yours, right? But there's a kazayas of it left. Then we say Samach Alav the Shabbos. Then you can rely on it to be able to cook from Yom Tov to Shabbos. This volume of a kazayas is really the minimum size of food that you need, right? Making a little tiny thing of food isn't going to be enough. You have to at least have a kazayas of food to make an Erev, to be considered I've made an Erev Tavshilin. But if let's say I started with larger and I at least have a kazayas left, my Erev Tavshilin is still considered present, and I can cook from Yom Tov to Shabbos because what I cooked from before Yom Tov for Shabbos still remains. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
So what is the